everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Lord of the Rings AMA podcast. My name is Matthias Austin, and on this podcast, I invite you to ask me anything about Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, or anything related to the greater legendarium of J.R.R. Tolkien, and I will do my best to give you as in-depth an answer as I can. But before we start the show today, two quick announcements. First, I have started a YouTube channel. It's the Lord of the Rings AMA podcast on YouTube, same title as the show. There's a link for that below in the show notes. And so far, it's just the audio of the shows, so, you're already listening to this, so there's not a whole lot more for you there right now, but my hope is that in the future, I'm going to be doing some video content. So, check out the channel, subscribe to it, and check back when I've got the video stuff up that I want to put up. And the second announcement is that there's another link in the show notes for a Patreon interest survey. So if you get a chance, click that link and let me know what, if anything, you would possibly want out of a Patreon for this show. I want this to be something that's not just churning out content for the sake of content, but it's something that all of you actually would like. So your voice is really important to me. So click that link, let me know what you think. Okay, announcements over. Let's get started with today's show. If you would like to submit a question, you can email it to lotramapod@gmail.com. Just like this week's question asker, Brian McKenzie from Kelowna, British Columbia in Canada. Brian asks, I've always been fascinated by the secret city of Gondolin. Can you tell us about the rise and fall of this incredible city, and how its legacy impacted the Lord of the Rings? Well, thank you so much, Brian, for that question. I was genuinely excited when I read this email because, like Brian, the story of Gondolin, it captures my attention in a way that it's almost hard to describe. Even the title of the story, the chapter in the Silmarillion, it's The Fall of Gondolin, right? And that brings to mind images of great tragedy. It's like the fall of Troy or something like that. It just lives in the mind. And the story of Gondolin is one of what Tolkien called the three great tales of the first age of Middle-earth. The stories that Tolkien viewed as the most essential to his world building. The first is the Children of Húrin, which was very fleshed out and completed. Beren and Luthien was the next one, which was mostly finished, and the rest was very clearly sketched out. And then there was the Fall of Gondolin, which was the least complete version, despite actually being the first that Tolkien wrote of the three. And it's actually the first story he ever wrote about the world of Arda and Middle-earth. There's also a sneaky fourth great tale, The Voyage of Eärendil, and that one was the least complete. It really only exists in fragments of poems, and unlike the other three, it never got a standalone book. Now, I've talked before about how after J.R.R.'s death, his son Christopher began to compile his father's work and attempt to put it all into some semblance of order. And this led to the publishing of the Silmarillion, the Unfinished Tales, and the 12-volume History of Middle-earth, which was full of these story fragments and notes and editorial comments explaining how the stories developed over the years. And Christopher never stopped trying to complete his father's work. And the last three books that Christopher published were the Three Great Tales, released in the late 2010s when he was actually in his 90s. One of them, The Children of Húrin, that works as a single narrative. There's a little bit of a preface, but then it's a full story. But the others, like Beren and Luthien and The Fall of Gondolin, are filled with the various iterations of the stories throughout the years. And now, I say all of this to highlight just how important these stories are to the world of Middle-earth, and how much information there is about them. So, in order to do them justice, while keeping the episodes to a manageable length, I'm going to make this Part 1, The Rise of Gondolin. And next week, we'll do Part 2, The Fall of Gondolin, as well as its legacy on the whole legendarium. So, to begin, because The Fall of Gondolin is actually the third of the Great Tales chronologically, and this kind of is a downside to the way that we've set up this podcast where people emailing me questions. Because I'm not going chronologically, when I get a question like this, I'm going to need to go back a little bit before the story of Gondolin actually starts and remind everyone about what happened, how we got here, and specifically what the Noldoran elves in Middle-earth are up to. Now, I'm going to gloss over a lot of history, so if anything catches your interest, hey, email it in as a question to lotramapod@gmail.com. Also, what we're going to talk about today involves just a lot of names, maybe more than in any other episode. So I would suggest that you click the link in the show notes for the Noldor family tree. It's going to be really helpful for you to just keep track of who is who in this story. So the shortest possible version of this background information that we need is this. And just so you know, I reworked my notes on this numerous times to try to make it more concise because there's just so much stuff here. But here is my attempt at brevity. Morgoth, also named Melkor, was imprisoned by the Valar to protect the elves. Most of the elves moved to Valinor, though some of the Teleri/Sindar elves remained in Middle-earth in the land of Beleriand. And of the elves that went to Valinor, the Noldor were the most skilled at making things. And Feanor, the son of King Finwë, king of all the Noldor, Feanor was the most gifted craftsman that ever existed in the history of the world. And he created the Silmarils, jewels that shone with the light of the two trees that illuminated all of Valinor. Now, Morgoth was eventually released from captivity, and he was claiming that he had been reformed, that he actually wanted to help the world, help the Valar, and help nurture the elves and teach them things. But secretly, he hated the elves, and he especially hated Feanor because Feanor saw through his lies. Now, Feanor, he kind of hated a lot of people, and there was some bad blood between Feanor and his half-brothers, Fingolfin and Finarfin. And at one point, it almost erupted into violence, with Feanor drawing his sword on his brother Fingolfin. And Feanor, as a result of this, was temporarily exiled to his city. His city was called Formenos, and it was farther away from where the rest of the Noldor lived, and it kind of just gave them time to let things cool off. The Valar said, hey, you go over there, chill out for a year. You can't come near your brothers, you got to stay exiled over there. And Finwë, because Feanor was actually his firstborn and his favorite, went with him. But after about a year, I think it was a year passed, the Valar said, we're going to bring you guys together, we're going to have a ceremony, overseen by the Valar. Manwë was watching as a witness, and there they were going to officially forgive one another. And during that ceremony, Morgoth, with the assistance of Ungoliant, who's the ultimate ancestor of Shelob, a massive giant spider, the two of them killed the two trees, which plunged the world into darkness. And then Morgoth went to Formenos, and he stole the Silmarils, and he killed King Finwë. And he crossed back to Middle-earth with Ungoliant. They had a little fight, but he drove her off. And eventually he got back to Middle-earth, and he sets up his fortress of Angband deep underground that Sauron had been kind of keeping safe for him. And above the underground fortress of Angband, he built this mountain of just slag and debris. It was the triple-peaked mountain of Thangorodrim, or Thangorodrim. I'm going to say it both ways, I'm sure. And after this happened, Feanor swore an oath of vengeance, and all of his 7 sons did the same. And they tried to lead the Noldor, because Feanor was now the king. He wanted to lead the Noldor back across the sea to reclaim the Silmarils and get revenge for what Morgoth had done. And in the process of this, Feanor and his sons and their houses attempted to steal ships of the Teleri that were living in Valinor. And in the process of trying to steal their ships, there was battle that broke out, and the Noldor killed many of the Teleri. And for this act, Feanor and his sons were banished from Valinor. Mandos, the doomsman of the Valar, he appeared on a mountain range, and he said, because of what you've done, you are exiled, and you may never come back, Feanor and your sons and the people of their houses. And any other Noldor that choose to go with them, you will also be exiled and not allowed to come back. And Finarfin, Feanor's half-brother, Finarfin, he turned back, along with many of his people. But Finarfin's children, including Galadriel and Finrod, they chose to leave, as did the entire house led by Fingolfin. So Feanor, his sons, Fingolfin and his people, and the children of Finarfin choose to go across the sea into exile. And there's some more betrayal along the way, because Feanor and his sons actually abandoned the others. They stole the ships. They, in the middle of the night, sailed across the oceans to Middle-earth. They landed in Middle-earth, and they set the ships on fire. And the fire was so big that back across in Valinor, the Fingolfin and the other Noldor, they could see that the ships were burning. And instead of giving up and just turning around, they said, no, we're sticking with this. Partly because they wanted to have a reckoning with Feanor and his sons. And so Fingolfin led the Noldor who were going into exile up to the far north, where they were able to cross like the polar ice caps to cross over into Middle-earth. And along the way, many of the Noldor died. Just either fell into the seas or froze to death. It was a terrible, terrible journey. So there's more bad blood that happens with the Noldor. Feanor and his sons, they killed some Teleri, then they betrayed their other Noldor, and to top it all off, Feanor, the guy who started all of this, he died almost immediately. He was killed by Balrogs when he tried to attack Angband and attack Morgoth. The Balrogs, led by their captain Gothmog, came out and they killed him. So he was there for 2 days and then died. But his sons had been bound by this oath of vengeance. They were unable to stop. They had to steal the Silmarils back, or else they said, or else we call upon ourselves everlasting darkness. They would be cast out into the void if they ever just allowed the Silmarils to somebody else to hold them without them trying to retrieve them. So they said, we're here, we have to continue the fight despite the fact that Feanor is dead. And the eldest son of Feanor, Maedhros, he was captured by Morgoth, and he was chained to one of the high peaks of Thangorodrim. But the eldest son of Fingolfin, his name was Fingin. There's a lot of F names. We've already had Finrod, Finwë, Finarfin. I don't know why Tolkien did this, but they all have F names. But Fingin is the son of Fingolfin, who's the half-brother of Feanor. And so he's cousins to Maedhros, the eldest son of Feanor. And Fingin, he scales the mountain by himself, and he rescues Maedhros. But in the process, he's chained with an unbreakable chain, so he cuts off Maedhros' hand, and he fought left-handed from then on. But as thanks for this, Maedhros, he relinquishes his claim as the High King of the Noldor to his uncle, Fingolfin. And the sons of Feanor, then, they take their people and they set up this ring around Thangorodrim, and they lay siege to it for hundreds of years. And similarly, Fingolfin and then the children of Finarfin, Fingin and Galadriel, and their siblings and their people, they also set up this sort of siege of Thangorodrim. Okay, so that was just 15 minutes of background information that we need to actually talk about Gondolin. So that was a lot of names, that was a lot of nouns that I just threw at you. So yes, please check out that family tree in the show notes, and maybe give a re-listen to the Elven Explanation and Extravaganza episode, just as a refresher on Noldor and Teleri and Sindar. But okay, that background information was what we needed to get to the meat of the story today, which is this. There was a time, while that siege of Thangorodrim was wearing on, that Turgon, the second son of Fingolfin, the brother of Fingin who rescued Maedhros, so Turgon was traveling with Finrod, the eldest son of Finarfin, brother of Galadriel, but because Finarfin stayed over in Valinor, Finrod was the head of the House of Finarfin in Middle-earth. And so, honestly, Finrod and Turgon there's an argument that they're the two most important elves of the First Age. And if not 1 and 2, they're definitely in the top 5. And one night while they're traveling, they rested along the banks of this great river Sirion. And they both heard the voice of Ulmo, the Vala of the Waters. See, Ulmo's spirit flowed through all of the waters of the world. And so he, more than most of the Valar, maybe even more than Manwë, remained attuned to the goings-on of the Noldor and the other elves in Middle-earth, and we're told that he frequently would go and urge the Valar to aid the elves of Middle-earth because he was aware of every terrible thing that was happening to them. And when they hear the voice of Ulmo, Tolkien describes it like this in the Silmarillion. But Ulmo, coming up the river, laid a deep sleep upon them and heavy dreams, and the trouble of the dreams remained after they awoke. But neither said aught to the other, for their memory was not clear, and each believed that Ulmo had sent a message to him alone. But unquiet was upon them ever after, and doubt of what should befall, and they wandered often alone in untrodden lands, seeking far and wide for places of hidden strength, for it seemed to each that he was bidden to prepare for a day of evil, and to establish a retreat lest Morgoth should burst from Angband and overthrow the armies of the north. Now this would lead Finrod to eventually found the underground hidden realm of Nargothrond, which we talked a little bit in the episode about why dwarves and elves hate each other, but it mostly comes into the other two great tales, Children of Húrin and Beren and Luthien. But Turgon returned to his home by the sea, in the city called Neverast. But always his thoughts were troubled by these dreams and this message from Ulmo. Tolkien writes again in the Silmarillion, "But Turgon remembered the city set upon a hill, Tirion the fair with its tower and tree." And Tirion is the city where the Noldor lived in Valinor. "And he found not what he sought, but returned to Neverast, and sat in peace in Vinyamar by the shores of the sea. And in the next year Ulmo himself appeared to him, and bade him go forth again alone into the Vale of Sirion. And Turgon went forth, and by the guidance of Ulmo he discovered the hidden Vale of Tumladen in the encircling mountains, in the midst of which there was a hill of stone. Of this he spoke to none as yet, but returned once more to Neverast, and there began in his secret councils to devise the plan of a city after the manner of Tirion upon Tuna, for which his heart yearned in exile." And it might be Tuna or it might be Tuna. Tolkien was a stickler with how his languages worked, and if it happened to have a similarity to regular English, he said, well, that's just a coincidence, and he wouldn't change it. So there was a hill that the city of Tirion was on in Valinor, and it was the hill of Tuna. That's just a little funny quirk of Tolkien's writing that I just wanted to share with you guys. So anyway, he finds this hidden valley in the mountains with a hill of stone, and he thinks, I'm going to start making plans for a city. And the place he had found, it could only be accessed through a hidden tunnel that led through a dense mountain range. And it was like a dry stream bed that led through narrow valleys until it emerged into a big valley called Tumladen, at the center of which was this large stone hill surrounded on all sides by the towering mountains of the Echoriad, which are called the Encircling Mountains. And the creatures in Middle-earth, the only ones who knew about the existence of this place, were Turgon, the advisors he came up with when he started designing a city, and the eagles of Manwë which soared in the clouds above the mountains. Now meanwhile, Morgoth attempted to break the siege of Angband, but the sons of Feanor and the forces of King Fingolfin, they were prepared. And there were a bunch of great battles, and the third great battle of the First Age was called the Dagor Aglareb, which is the glorious battle. And after this battle, Tolkien, he writes this, "Fingolfin and Maedhros were not sleeping, and gathering swiftly great force of both Noldor and Sindar, they destroyed all the scattered bands of the orcs that had stolen into the land. But the main host they repelled, and drove out into the fields of Ardgalen, and there surrounded it and destroyed it to the least and last within sight of Angband." So there's this great battle that the elves win. And not long after that, Glaurung, the first dragon, emerged from Angband, but he was still young and his scales weren't hardened yet, and so he was beaten back into the fortress of Angband beneath the mountains of Thangorodrim. And so the elves, they had these victories and were feeling really good, but Turgon saw these events as a sign that Morgoth was stirring up trouble. He was getting stronger. And so he made the decision to move his entire people in secret to the hidden Vale of Tumladen and the City of Stone, Gondolin. And Ulmo visited Turgon again. This is what it's written in the Silmarillion. Then Turgon prepared to depart from Neverast and leave his halls in Vinyamar beside the sea. And there Ulmo came to him once again and spoke with him. And he said, "Now thou shalt go at last to Gondolin, Turgon, and I will maintain my power in the Vale of Sirion and in all the waters therein, so that none shall mark thy going, nor shall any find there the hidden entrance against thy will. Longest of all the realms of the Eldaliae, which are the elves, shall Gondolin stand against Melkor. But love not too well the work of thy hands and the devices of thy heart, and remember that the true hope of the Noldor lieth in the west and cometh from the sea." And Ulmo warned Turgon that he also lay under the doom of Mandos, which Ulmo had no power to remove. "Thus it may come to pass," he said, "that the curse of the Noldor shall find thee too ere the end, and treason awake within thy walls. Then they shall be in peril of fire. But if this peril draweth nigh indeed, then even from Neverast one shall come to warn thee, and from him, beyond ruin and fire, hope shall be born for elves and men. Leave therefore in this house arms and a sword, that in years to come he may find them, and thus shalt thou know him and not be deceived." And Ulmo declared to Turgon of what kind and stature should be the helm and mail and sword that he left behind. So in secret, the entire population of King Turgon vanishes, and no one knows where they went. And they abandoned their halls in Neverast. Turgon, he did leave behind this suit of armor at Ulmo's instructions. And inside the city of Gondolin, the people of Turgon flourished. Now, Turgon's wife had died on that journey across the ice when the Noldor first arrived in Middle-earth, but his daughter, Idril, survived, as did his sister, Eredhel. And we are told that the beauty of Gondolin rivaled even the beauty of the city of Tirion in Valinor, and it was full of light and water, with streams and fountains which ran down the smooth sides of the rock island upon which the city was built. And there were great statues of the two trees of Valinor that were created in honor of the light that was lost in the west. And for 200 years, the realms in Beleriand had peace. Morgoth was contained, though he was secretly building his forces. And during that 200 years, men first arrived in Beleriand, having traveled from the Far East. And I'm not going to go too much into the history of men in this episode, other than to say that there were three primary houses of men that arrived, and they were called the Edain. The house of Beor, which was loyal to Finrod and the house of Finarfin. Beren was from the house of Beor. The house of Haleth, which they just had a lot of misfortune, and they kind of just end up living in the woods by themselves. And most important to this story, the house of Hador, which was loyal to King Fingolfin, the High King. But that's all happening outside of Gondolin. Meanwhile, in Gondolin, Eredhel, Turgon's sister, was growing restless. Now, she loved the hidden city, but she missed that freedom to just roam the lands, and so she kept asking Turgon if she could leave. And Turgon resisted at first because he was paranoid, and ultimately not without good reason, it would turn out, that if people started leaving, then the secrecy of the land would be betrayed. But he finally said, okay, you can go, but you have to take these guards, these lords that I'm going to send with you, and you can only go to see our brother, Fingon. And she said, yeah, okay, sure, that works, that's fine. So she leaves with these lords that are acting as like her bodyguards. And once she leaves, she says, hey, guys, I'm not going to go see Fingon. I'm good friends with the Sons of Feanor. I want to go visit them. Now, for what it's worth, seeing the Sons of Feanor was always a bad idea. So they journey south instead of north to Fingon. So they journey south to get to the Sons of Feanor, and they come to the realm of Doriath. Now, Doriath is where King Thingol is the king, and he had closed off the land to all outsiders. He did not trust the Noldor, and the land was magically protected by his wife, Melian, who was Amaya, queen of Doriath and the mother to Luthien. And so they couldn't enter into Doriath, even though that would be the quickest way to get around. So there was this narrow strip of land between Doriath and a place called the Ered Gorgoroth, which mean the Mountains of Terror. And in those mountains, the spawn of Ungoliant, the spider that had killed the trees, her children lived there, these other evil spiders. And their evil mixed with the magic of Melian, and it created this dangerous and enchanted land between the two realms. And so as Eredhel and her guard are traveling through there, Eredhel gets separated from them and is lost. And the guards are searching for her, but they're unable to find her, and so they end up just returning to Gondolin. But Eredhel was not lost, and so she ended up actually passing through the land safely until she came upon a dark forest called Nan Elmoth. And deep in the forest there lived a Sindar elf named Eol. And he was a strange elf. He hated the sunlight, and so he just lived in darkness, and he would often trade with dwarves, and he learned much of smithing from them. And he had been granted this small wood of Nan Elmoth to live in by King Thingol in exchange for a sword that was made from the metal of a meteorite, and he smithed that sword in his smithy. It was a black sword, and it was straight up evil. But it was a very sharp sword, but it was a cursed evil sword. And that sword doesn't come into this story. It's part of the Children of Húrin. But anyway, that's just to say, Eol doing weird stuff in the woods. And Eredhel, she gets lost in these woods, which kind of were enchanted as well. And Eol sees her, and he becomes enamored with her. In the Silmarillion, Tolkien writes, "And when Eredhel, weary with wandering, came at last to his doors, he revealed himself, and he welcomed her, and he led her into his house, and there she remained, for Eol took her to wife, and it was long ere any of her kin heard of her again. It is not said that Eredhel was wholly unwilling, nor that her life in Nan Elmoth was hateful to her for many years. For though at Eol's command she must shun the sunlight, they wandered far together under the trees or by the light of the sickle moon, or she might fare alone as she would, save that Eol forbade her to seek the sons of Feanor or any others of the Noldor. And Eredhel bore to Eol a son in the shadows of Nan Elmoth, and in her heart she gave him a name in the forbidden tongue of the Noldor, Lomion, that signifies child of the twilight. But his father gave him no name until he was 12 years old. Then he called him Maeglin, which is sharp glance, for he perceived that the eyes of his son were more piercing than his own, and his thought could read the secrets of hearts beyond the mist of words." So you have to hope that there was some love between them, and that none of this was coerced. But Eol, he's not a good dude, so who knows? But in the end, Eredhel and Eol had their son, Maeglin. And when Maeglin grew older, he began to ask Eredhel if he could ever go see Gondolin, because she would tell stories of the city, and when she told the stories, she would start to grow homesick for it, and she wanted to see the sun again. So, while Eol was away on business with the dwarves, she took Maeglin and left for Gondolin. And she was welcomed back by Turgon, and Maeglin was especially welcomed. But Eol returned early, and finding them gone, he tracked them, and he even dared to go out in the sunlight. He had a brief run-in with one of the particularly awful sons of Feanor, though there weren't many good ones, but Curufin, a real bad one, ran into him before picking up the trail and following them into Gondolin. And he found the hidden entrance, and he tried to travel through it, but he was caught by these guards. And when he was discovered, he was brought before Turgon, who welcomed him as his brother-in-law, and Turgon told Eol that he was welcome to live in Gondolin, but that he was never allowed to leave. And that did not go over well. Here's what Tolkien writes in the Silmarillion. "But Turgon treated him, Eol, with honor, and rose up and would take his hand, and he said, 'Welcome, kinsman, for so I hold you. Here you shall dwell at your pleasure, save only that you must here abide and depart not from my kingdom. For it is my law that none who finds the way hither shall depart.' But Eol withdrew his hand. 'I acknowledge not your law,' he said. 'No right have you or any of your kin in this land to seize realms or to set bounds, either here or there. This is the land of the Teleri, to which you bring war and all unquiet, dealing ever proudly and unjustly. I care nothing for your secrets, and I came not to spy upon you, but to claim my own, my wife and my son. Yet if in Eredhel your sister you have some claim, then let her remain. Let the bird go back to the cage, where she soon will sicken again, as she sickened before. But not so Maeglin. My son you shall not withhold from me. Come, Maeglin, son of Eol, your father commands you. Leave the house of his enemies and the slayers of his kin, or be accursed. But Maeglin answered nothing. Then Turgon sat in his high seat, holding his staff of doom, and in a stern voice spoke, I will not debate with you, Dark Elf. By the swords of the Noldor alone are your sunless woods defended. Your freedom to wander there wild you owe to my kin. But for them, long since you would have labored in the thraldom in the pits of Angband. And here I am king. And whether you will it or will it not, my doom is law. This choice only is given to you, to abide here or to die here, and so also for your son. Then Eol looked into the eyes of King Turgon, and he was not daunted, but stood long without word or movement, while a still silence fell upon the hall. And Eredhel was afraid, knowing that he was perilous. Suddenly, swift as a serpent, he seized a javelin that he held hid beneath his cloak, and he cast it at Maeglin, crying, The second choice I take, and for my son also. You shall not hold what is mine. And he hurls his javelin at Maeglin. But Eredhel, she jumps in the way, and she sacrifices her own life to save her son. And the story continues. And they led him, Eol, forth to the Kragadur, a precipice of black rock upon the north side of a hill of Gondolin, there to cast him down from the sheer walls of the city. And Maeglin stood by, and said nothing. But at the last Eol cried, So you forsake your father and his kin, ill-gotten son. Here shall you fail of all your hopes, and here may you yet die the same death as I. Maeglin said nothing. He just watched, emotionless. And over time, Maeglin, he became a trusted advisor to Turgon. And when eventually the armies of Gondolin went to war, which we're going to get to that next week, Maeglin proved himself a mighty warrior, and he fought valiantly for Turgon. But Maeglin had a terrible secret. You see, he had become enamored with Turgon's daughter, Idril, who was his cousin, and she knew what he was thinking. And Tolkien writes this. The Eldar, the elves, the Eldar wedded not with kin so near, nor ever before had any desired to do so. And however that might be, Idril loved Maeglin not at all, and knowing his thought of her, she loved him the less. For it seemed to her a thing strange and crooked in him, as indeed the Eldar ever since have deemed it, an evil fruit of the kinslaying, whereby the shadow of the curse of Mandos fell upon the last hope of the Noldor. But as the years passed, still Maeglin watched Idril, and waited, and his love turned to darkness in his heart. And he sought the more to have his will in other matters, shirking no toil or burden, if he might thereby have power. Thus it was in Gondolin, and amid all the bliss of that realm, while its glory lasted, a dark seed of evil was sown. And that feels like a good place to stop for this episode. See, Turgon, he's now built Gondolin at the urging of Ulmo, and he leaves this suit of armor in his old throne room for an unknown person in the event that Morgoth's power grows too strong. Eredhel, his sister, was killed by her husband Eol, and their son Maeglin is holding a position of high power within the city, though he's secretly brooding on his thwarted desires for his cousin Idril. And this is the beginning of the fall of Gondolin. Next week, we'll see what happens when the evil of Maeglin combines with the evil of Morgoth, and when the unexpected savior of not just the people of Gondolin, but everyone in Middle-earth arrives unlooked for. So there you go, Brian. I hope you enjoyed that first half of the story of Gondolin. And if you, like Brian, would like to submit a question, you can email me at lotramapod@gmail.com. Don't forget to click that Patreon interest survey in the show notes. Be sure to subscribe to the show. Leave a 5-star rating and review. Tell your friends all about it. You can follow me on Instagram, on Threads, and YouTube, and there's links for all of that below. Thank you, as always, to Michael for our music and Lauren for our artwork. And that's all for this week. Iluvatar willing, I'll be back next week. See you then.